Her hands trembled, clutching the clay pot with a force that made her knuckles turn white. Her simple, light linen dress looked like a rag next to the silk and brocades that surrounded her. She heard the giggles, the venomous words disguised as whispers. "Poor thing," one of them said. "What nerve, coming empty-handed." Eliza lifted her chin. Fear was a knot in her throat, but the truth was the only thing she had left. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you are joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. Harmony Estate, nestled in the heart of the Hudson Valley near Hyde Park, was a world apart. Its lands stretched as far as the eye could see, a verdant carpet of coffee plantations that undulated under the New York sun. The manor house, with its tall windows and intricately carved wooden verandas, was a palace amidst nature, a symbol of the power and wealth of Baron Anthony Albright. For Eliza, who lived with her father, Mordred, on a modest homestead bordering the Baron's lands, the estate was like a distant dream. Since she was a little girl, she had watched the lights come on in the grand house at dusk and imagined the stories those walls held. Anthony was a man whom time and sorrow had made serious. A widower for almost 5 years, he managed his empire with an iron fist and a heart if you truly knew. The death of his wife, Isabella, had taken with it the joy of the manor house. The Baron withdrew, and the sound of his laughter became a rare memory. The pressure from other estate owners in the region for him to remarry was constant. "A man like you needs a baroness by his side, Anthony. You need an heir to carry on your name," they would say at business dinners. He listened to everything with calculated patience, but the idea of an arranged marriage, a union of convenience, caused him deep discomfort. He wanted something money couldn't buy: loyalty, character, a pure soul that would remind him why he once believed in love. It was then that the news spread like wildfire. The Baron would host a grand ball. It wasn't just any party. The invitation, written in elegant calligraphy, stated that all unmarried young women of the region were welcome. The buzz was immediate. Mothers and daughters rushed to seamstresses, orders were placed in the city, and nothing else was spoken of. Everyone knew what it meant. The Baron was, finally, looking for a new wife. In Mr. George's simple cottage, the news arrived, brought by a neighbor. Eliza heard everything while mending a fence in the pasture, her hands dirty with soil. The idea of going to the ball seemed absurd to her. "Imagine, father, me among those people. What would I wear?" "That's not a place for the likes of us," she said to her father that evening. Mr. George, a man of few words and great wisdom, looked at her over his spectacles. "Our place is where we allow ourselves to be, my daughter. Dignity isn't in the dress one wears, but in the way one carries oneself in it." Her father's words echoed in Eliza's head. She had no ambitions of becoming a baroness, but the curiosity to see the manor house from the inside, to feel for one night the magic of that universe so different from her own, was tempting. With the help of a friendly seamstress, she refurbished her mother's best dress, a simple blue cotton gown that highlighted the color of her brown eyes. The night of the ball arrived, and Harmony Estate glowed. Dozens of chandeliers illuminated the grand hall, reflecting in the crystals and silverware. The air was impregnated with the sweet scent of rare flowers and the expensive fragrances of the guests. The young women paraded their shimmering gowns, their studied smiles, and their expectant gazes. Eliza felt like a fish out of water. She stayed in a corner, observing everything, marveling and intimidated. Baron Anthony appeared at the top of the grand staircase, and an immediate silence fell over the hall. He descended the steps slowly, his firm gaze passing over each face. He was dressed with sober elegance, his dark hair already streaked with silver at the temples. He thanked everyone for their presence, and, with a grave voice that commanded respect, made his announcement. "My late wife, Isabella, used to say that the beauty of a flower isn't in its petals, but in the strength of its seed. Therefore today I seek not just a companion, but someone with a fertile soul." He paused, creating a suspense that left all the guests holding their breath. Then he raised a small carved wooden box. "Each of you will receive a seed. You will have 1 month to plant it and care for it. The one who brings me the most beautiful plant, the most exuberant flower, will be the new Baroness of Harmony Estate." A collective shiver ran through the hall. The challenge was unusual, almost poetic, and ignited competition in the eyes of all present. One by one, the young women were called and received a velvet pouch with the small seed from the Baron's hands. When it was Eliza's turn, her heart beat erratically. She approached, made a timid curtsy, and took the pouch. For an instant her eyes met the Baron's. They were blue-gray, deep and scrutinizing, as if they could see right through her. He didn't smile, but she felt a kind of recognition in his gaze. It was at that moment that the heart of that simple young woman, with calloused hands, realized that destiny, in a strange and unpredictable way, might be offering her a chance. Eliza rode home on horseback, under the moonlight that silvered the fields near Hyde Park. The velvet pouch was tucked into her apron pocket, and she squeezed it now and then, as if to make sure it was real. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the rhythmic trot of the horse were the only company for her thoughts. The Baron's proposal was the strangest thing she'd ever heard. It wasn't a matter of dowry, family name, or beauty, but of skill with the land. And that, she thought, was perhaps something she understood. Upon arriving, she found her father on the porch, smoking his corncob pipe, waiting for her. He looked at her with affection and asked how it had been. Eliza told him everything, the grandeur of the party, the beauty of the hall, and finally the unusual challenge. She took the pouch from her pocket and showed the seed to her father. It was small, dark, and common-looking. George took it between his fingers, examined it under the lantern light, and smiled faintly. "A seed, ... single quotes," he murmured. "Interesting. A man who asks to see what sprouts before choosing with whom he'll share his life. He's a cleverer man than he appears." He returned the seed to his daughter. "And so, what will you do?" "I'll plant it, father. I'll care for it with all the devotion in the world. It's the only chance I have," Eliza replied, with a determination that surprised even herself. "Do that, my daughter," he said, in his usual calm voice. "But remember one thing. Not every seed is meant to sprout on the outside. Sometimes what truly matters is what we plant within." He touched his own chest, and Eliza, though she didn't fully comprehend the meaning of those words, stored them in her heart. The next day, she began her mission. She chose the best clay parts she had, prepared the soil with almost religious care, mixing manure and dried leaves to make it rich in nutrients. She placed the seed in the center of the pot, covered it with a thin layer of earth, and watered it with fresh well water. She placed the pot on the kitchen window, where it would receive the morning sun. Every day, her routine was the same. She woke up, tended to the animals, helped her father, and several times a day she would check the pot. She watered it, loosened the soil, talked to the seed, asking it to germinate. Meanwhile, in the other houses of the region, The competition was fierce and full of stratagems. Veronica Burton, daughter of a wealthy merchant, was the most determined of all. Beautiful, arrogant, and accustomed to getting everything she wanted, she saw marriage to the Baron as a natural step in her social climb. Upon receiving the seed, she laughed disdainfully. "What a simplistic idea," she told her friends. "As if I would dirty my hands with soil." The same day, she ordered one of her servants to go to the city and buy the rarest and most spectacular orchid they could find. "No one needs to know where it came from. What matters is the victory," she decreed. The other contenders were not much different. News of exotic flowers and lush plants began to spread. Each one wanted to surpass the other. The Baron's challenge had transformed into a war of vanities, where lies were the main weapon. At Harmony Estate, Baron Anthony watched everything from a distance. He sat in his study, looking out the window at the gardens his late wife had loved so much. The idea of the test had come from a memory of Isabella. Years ago she had shown him 2 identical seeds. "One of them will produce the most beautiful flower you've ever seen, my love. The other will produce nothing. It is sterile," she had said. "But only time and the earth can reveal the truth of each one. Just as it is with people." Those words returned to him when he decided to seek a new companion. He didn't want a hothouse flower, a purchased beauty. He wanted to find someone with the courage to show the truth, even if the truth was a part of empty soil. It was a test of character, and he observed, with a mixture of cynicism and a small hope, how each of the contenders would behave. Days turned into weeks, and in Eliza's pot, on the kitchen window, nothing happened. The soil remained dark, damp, and silent. Not a single green leaf, no sign of life. Her hope began to wither, giving way to an anguish that squeezed her chest. The seed of doubt, that one, truly began to sprout in her soul. The first rumor reached Eliza's ears during her weekly trip to Hyde Park Village to buy provisions. 2 young women, daughters of a neighboring estate owner, were chatting animatedly near the general store. "Did you see the rose that bloomed in Lydia's pot? It's such a vibrant red, it looks like velvet," one said. "Well, it's nothing compared to the jasmine at Veronica Burton's house. You can smell the perfume from the gate," the other replied. Eliza tightened the strap of her basket and quickened her pace, feeling her face burn. In her pot, there was only soil. With each passing day, the pressure increased. News of the miraculous gardens of the other contenders spread through the region like a plague. There was talk of tulips that had never been seen around there, of lilies that grew overnight, of flowers with fantastic colors and shapes. The competition had become a public spectacle, and each candidate's house became a visiting point for curious friends and neighbors. Veronica Burton's house was the busiest of all. The rare orchid she had bought in the city was transplanted into the challenge pot and became the main attraction. With its velvety petals and a deep purple hue, the flower was truly stunning. Veronica displayed it with triumphant pride, receiving compliments as if they were an acquired right. "It's my special touch," she would say, with a false smile. "Plants feel our energy, and mine is royal." At home, Eliza's anguish deepened. The pot on the kitchen window became a constant reminder of her failure. She began to question herself. Had she done something wrong, put too much water, or too little? Perhaps the soil wasn't good enough. She tried everything. She moved the pot so it would get more sun. She added more fertilizer. She even sang to the seed, a lullaby her mother used to sing to her. But the silence of the earth was her only answer. Mr. George watched his daughter's suffering in silence. One night he found her quietly weeping on the porch, looking into the darkness. He sat beside her and put an arm round her shoulders. "What's wrong, my daughter?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Nothing will grow, father. I'm useless. All the others succeeded, except me. What will the Baron think? That I'm so incapable I can't even make a seed sprout." The words tumbled out, laden with frustration. George let her vent. When her tears subsided, he spoke in his gentle voice. "Let me tell you a story. When I was a young man, a drover sold me a horse. He said it was the strongest and fastest animal in the region. I paid everything I had and didn't have for it. On the first day, the beast ran beautifully. On the second, it limped. On the third, it didn't even get up. The drower tricked me. I could have gone after him, started a fight, but do you know what I did? I took care of the horse. It never ran like before, but it became the most loyal creature I ever had, helping me plow the land for years. I learned that day that we cannot control what others give us, but we can control what we do with it. Your honesty in caring for this seed, even if it gives you nothing in return, is worth more than the most beautiful flower that a lie can buy." Her father's words were a balm to Eliza's afflicted heart. She didn't feel completely consoled, but a new perspective began to form in her mind. The problem wasn't her. Perhaps the problem was with the seed. Meanwhile, at Harmony Estate, Baron Anthony continued with his plan. He called Matthew, his trusted foreman, a man who had served him since he was a boy. "Matthew, I want you to travel the region. Go to the general stores. Talk to people. Listen to conversations. I want to know about all these miraculous flowers appearing around here," the Baron ordered. Matthew was discreet and efficient. For a week, he traveled the roads, stopped in the villages, drank coffee in the general stores, and listened to everything. He returned with a detailed report. He told of Veronica's orchid, which one of her cousins swore he had seen for sale in a flower shop on Fifth Avenue in the city. He spoke of the Miller family's lilies, which were identical to those the parish priest had ordered for the church's annual fair. Each story confirmed the Baron's suspicion. He listened to everything without showing surprise, an ironic smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Just as I imagined. Flowers of deceit everywhere," he said to himself after Matthew had left. His test was working exactly as planned. It was revealing the nature of each of the contenders. Now only one question remained in his mind. What about the simple young woman with sincere eyes, Mr. George's daughter? The cattle farmer, what was happening in her part? Curiosity gnawed at him, mixed with a faint, almost extinguished, hope that perhaps one of them was different. With little more than a week left before the deadline, Baron Anthony decided it was time to see things with his own eyes. His curiosity, especially regarding Ma, George's daughter, had grown too great to ignore. He announced at home that he would be out resolving business in the vicinity, a plausible excuse that would not raise suspicions. He saddled his best horse, an imposing sorrel, and departed under the morning sun. His first stop, calculated, was at the Burton estate. He was received with much fanfare by Veronica and her mother, who almost fainted with emotion at the unexpected visit. "Baron, what an honor! To what do we owe the pleasure?" said the mother, fanning herself with a fan. "I was passing through, and decided to stop to greet you," he replied, with his formal politeness. "And I also heard of an extraordinary flower that has bloomed around here." Veronica's face lit up. "Ah, you heard? Come see, Baron. She is proof that nature has chosen me." She led him to the veranda, where the magnificent purple orchid rested in its pot, triumphant. It was indeed a spectacular flower. The Baron approached, feigning admiration. "Truly impressive," he said, touching one of the petals with his fingertip. His gaze, however, was not that of a flower admirer, but of an expert evaluating a jewel. He noticed the way the plant was set in the soil, somewhat artificially, and a small, almost invisible wire that supported it. "You have fairy hands, no doubt." Veronica puffed out her chest with pride. "I've always had a special gift, Baron. A gift for cultivating beauty." "I see," he replied, with a dryness in his voice that went unnoticed by her. He then bid farewell, leaving behind an exultant Veronica, convinced that victory was already hers. The Baron mounted his horse and rode down the road, but instead of returning to Harmony Estate, he took a detour, a dirt shortcut that passed behind Mark, Georget's small homestead. He had no intention of stopping, just of observing from afar. He slowed his horse, which walked silently along the leaf-covered trail. From a clearing among the trees, he spotted the simple house, with its modest porch and the corral beside it. And then he saw her. Eliza was in the yard tossing corn to the chickens. She wore a faded dress and a scarf on her head to protect herself from the sun. She moved with a natural grace, without any affectation. After feeding the birds, she walked to the kitchen window and picked up the clay pot. The Baron held his breath, watching her. Eliza held the pot with both hands and observed it with an expression of deep melancholy. Anthony's heart skipped a beat. The pot was empty, completely empty, just dark soil. He saw her sigh, a heavy sigh, of one carrying a great disappointment. She ran her finger along the rim of the pot, as if caressing it, and placed it back on the window. At that moment, she turned, as if sensing she was being watched, and her gaze met the Baron's over the wooden fence. It was a quick, electric instant. Eliza startled, her face flushing violently. The Baron, caught by surprise, merely inclined his head in a brief greeting, and without thinking, tipped his hat. Then he spurred his horse and went on his way, his heart beating faster in his chest. He rode for the rest of the afternoon without a clear destination, the image of Eliza and her empty pot etched in his mind. All the others showed him exuberant flowers, fruits of deceit and vanity. She, on the other hand, cared for her failure with a kind of sad dignity. There was more truth and more beauty in that pot of soil than in all the orchids and roses he had seen. That fortuitous encounter changed everything for him. The test, which had begun as a cynical way to unmask falsehood, had now transformed into something else. He was no longer just looking for the most honest woman. He was, without realizing it, beginning to root for her. The image of her, standing under the sun, with her simple clothes and her sincere expression of disappointment, awakened in him a feeling he thought had died with Isabella's endurance. The Baron returned to Harmony Estate at dusk, feeling, for the first time in a long time, a spark of hope that perhaps something pure and true still existed in the world. The last week dragged on for Eliza like a long, silent torture. The deadline was approaching, and the pot on the kitchen window continued to be a monument to her failure. Each morning she woke with a pang of hope, rushed to the window, and found the same scene: dark, motionless soil. The brief exchange of glances with the Baron, days earlier, only served to increase her shame. Now he knew. He had seen her failure with his own eyes. On the eve of the presentation day, despair overcame her. Sitting on the porch beside her father, she finally broke down. "I'm not going, Father. I can't go. It would be too great a humiliation. All of them will arrive with wonderful flowers, and I'll bring a pot of dirt. They'll laugh at me. The Baron will laugh at me." Mr. George finished lighting his pipe, exhaling the smoke slowly before replying. He didn't look at her, keeping his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the sun set in shades of orange and purple. "And since when do you care about the laughter of others, my daughter? You were raised to stand tall, but this is different. It's a disgrace," she insisted, her voice choked. "I tried everything. I cared for that seed as if it were a treasure, and it gave me this in return. Nothing." "Then you will take the nothing," he said, with disconcerting simplicity. "You will take the result of your effort and your honesty. If he gave you a dead seed, it's not your fault. Your part, which was to care for it, you did, and you did it right." He finally turned to her, his small, wise eyes meeting hers, full of tears. "Truth, my daughter, sometimes weighs heavily. It's like carrying a sack of stones on your back. But it's a weight that strengthens you, that keeps your feet on the ground. A lie that's light as a feather. You carry it without feeling it. But one day the wind blows stronger. And it's the lie that throws you off balance and breaks your spirit." The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of crickets beginning to chirp. Her father's words, as always, were direct and precise, hitting the core of her anguish. She had not lied. She had not deceived. She had only cared, waited, and received emptiness as an answer. And if that was her truth, then it was with that truth that she would walk. A sudden calm invaded her. The decision was made. She stood up, wiped away her tears with the back of her hand, and looked at her father with a new determination in her eyes. "You're right. I'll go, and I'll take my part exactly as it is." Mr. George smiled, a genuine smile of pride. "That's my girl." The next morning, Eliza prepared with serene care. She washed and ironed her blue dress, the same one she had worn to the ball. She combed her hair and tied it in a simple bun. She wore no jewelry or adornments. Her only baggage was the clay pot. She picked it up in her hands. It was heavy. The weight of truth, she thought, remembering her father's words. In absolute contrast, at the Burton household, the morning was filled with celebration and commotion. Veronica tried on a new, imported, peach-colored silk gown that had cost a fortune. Her maids rushed back and forth, arranging her hair in an elaborate coiffure, fastening ribbons and jewels. She looked at herself in the mirror with a victorious smile, practicing the expression of surprise and gratitude she would make when the Baron announced her as his bride. The orchid, already carefully packaged for transport, was the finishing touch to her perfect plan. Her mother watched her, her eyes gleaming with covetousness. "Today, my daughter, will be the most important day of your life. You will be the Baroness Albright, the most powerful woman in the entire region." Veronica smiled at her reflection. "I expect nothing less than that, mother. I was born for this." Her confidence was unshakable, her arrogance boundless. She had no doubt that her deception would lead her to the top. To her, honesty was a virtue for the weak and poor. The strong, as she saw herself, shaped reality according to their desires. And she desired the power, wealth, and title that would come with the marriage. The part with the purchased flower was not a symbol of lies, but of her intelligence and her ability to get what she wanted, whatever the cost. The atmosphere in the grand hall of Harmony Estate was even more charged with tension than on the night of the first ball. Dozens of women who had accepted the challenge now lined up, each beside her part, which was covered by a delicate white linen cloth. Whispers were the soundtrack of the environment, a mixture of anxiety, envy, and speculation. The scent of the flowers, even muffled by the fabrics, mingled with the perfume of the guests, creating a sweet and oppressive fragrance. Baron Anthony stood near the large stone fireplace, his face a mask of seriousness. He spoke to no one, only observing the newcomers, his blue-gray gaze registering every detail. Matthew, his foreman, remained at a discreet distance, ready for any command. One by one, at the Baron's request, the young women unveiled their creations. With each cloth removed, exclamations of admiration were heard. There were roses of a perfect crimson, lilies white as snow, begonias with leaves that looked hand-painted. Each flower was more impressive than the last. The Baron walked slowly among them, observing each part. He said nothing, only nodded his head, which made the contenders even more nervous. Veronica Burton strategically had positioned herself to be one of the last. When her turn came, she removed the cloth with a theatrical gesture, revealing the magnificent purple orchid. A collective gasp of astonishment swept through the hall. The flower was, without a doubt, the most spectacular of all. "Baron," she said, her voice sweetened, "I cared for your seed with all the devotion of my heart, and it presented me with this marvel. I believe it bloomed to celebrate the union of our souls." The Baron gazed at her for a long moment. An almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "It is indeed a remarkable flower, Miss Burton. Your devotion is impressive." He continued walking, leaving her with the certainty of victory. Then an uncomfortable silence settled. Everyone had presented, everyone except one. The hall door opened and finally Eliza entered. She walked slowly, her head held high, but her face pale. In her trembling hands she carried the clay pot. There was no cloth covering it. There was nothing to hide, just dark, damp soil. The murmurs began immediately, cruel and audible. "What is she doing here?" whispered one. "What audacity!" said another. Some laughed openly, others looked at her with false pity. Veronica glared at her with a look of contempt and triumph. Eliza's humiliation was the icing on the cake of her victory. Eliza felt every gaze like a needle on her skin. For a second, her legs faltered, and she thought of turning back and fleeing. But then she remembered her father's voice, speaking of the weight of truth. She took a deep breath and continued to walk, the sound of her simple shoes echoing in the silence that had formed. She stopped at the end of the line, in the place assigned to her, and waited. The Baron turned and walked toward her. Each of his steps on the wooden floor seemed amplified by the sepulchral silence that now dominated the hall. He stopped directly in front of her. His eyes showed no anger or disdain, only an intense curiosity. The entire hall held its breath. He looked at the empty pot, and then into her eyes, which, despite containing tears, did not waver. "Why did you bring the pot empty?" asked the Baron. His voice was not loud, but it resonated throughout the room. Eliza swallowed hard, the knot in her throat almost preventing her from speaking. But the courage she didn't know she possessed came to her aid. "Because that's what the seed gave me, sir," she replied, her voice firm, surprising herself. "I cared for it every day. I prepared the soil, watered it, put it in the sun. I prayed, I waited, and still nothing grew." She paused, her chin held high. "But I didn't want to deceive you. I didn't want to replace what you entrusted to me. I thought perhaps the truth was worth more than a flower." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, as if the very air had solidified. No one dared to breathe. The Baron continued to gaze at her, his face indecipherable. Then he looked at the pot in her hands, then at the tense faces and the fake flowers of the other women. And, suddenly, to everyone's astonishment, a genuine smile, the first of that afternoon, crossed his lips. A smile of someone who had finally found exactly what he was looking for. The Baron's smile widened, transforming the severity of his face into an expression of profound contentment. He turned to the hall, his gaze sweeping over each of the contenders, who now stared at him with a mixture of confusion and dread. "Ladies," he began, his voice grave and clear, echoing through the hall. "A month ago, I gave each of you a seed. I asked you to plant it and bring me the result of your care today. And you have brought me magnificent flowers, each more beautiful than the last." He paused dramatically, allowing the tension to build. "There is only one problem. All the seeds I distributed were boiled beforehand. They were sterile. It would have been impossible for any of them to germinate." A choked cry was heard. The collective sound of dozens of hearts plummeting seemed to echo off the walls. The women's faces turned from pride to disbelief, and then to the purest, most overwhelming shame. The exuberant flowers, which moments before were symbols of triumph, now seemed like colorful, fragrant accusations. Their smiles froze, transforming into masks of panic. Veronica Burton turned white as wax. An orchid, once so imposing, now seemed to mock her. She opened her mouth to speak, to invent an excuse, but no sound came out. The Baron ignored the silent chaos that had settled and turned again to Eliza, who looked at him with wide eyes, barely able to process what she had just heard. He approached her and with a gentle gesture took the clay pot from her hands. He held it up for everyone to see. "I wasn't looking for the best gardener," he continued, his voice firm. "I was looking for a woman with the courage to bring me the truth. Even if the truth was an empty pot. I was looking for honesty, for integrity, for a character that does not bend before ambition." His gaze met Eliza's. "Today only one woman brought me what I asked for. Only this young woman had the bravery to cultivate sincerity." He placed the pot on a small nearby table and, before the entire stunned hall, took Eliza's hand. Her skin was cold, but he held it firmly and warmly. "Virtue isn't planted in a pot. It is born and blossoms within those with a pure soul. And that is why today I announce to all that this will be my wife. This will be the new Baroness of Harmony Estate." For an instant, the silence was so profound that one could hear the flickering of the candles in the chandeliers. Then a timid applause began, coming from the back of the hall. It was Minerve, George, who was watching everything from a corner, his face bathed in silent tears of pride. Soon, others joined him, and the applause grew until it became a warm wave that filled the room. Eliza, swept by a whirlwind of emotions, felt her heart beat as if it wanted to escape her chest. It was a dream. It could only be. She looked at the Baron, who now smiled openly at her, a smile that illuminated his blue-grey eyes. She looked at her father, who nodded at her, and the tears she had held back for so long finally rolled down her face. But they were not tears of sadness or humiliation, but of a relief and joy so immense that they seemed too great to fit inside her. The party, or what was left of it, quickly disbanded. The defeated guests hurried out, their faces covered by fans, dragging their pots as if they were evidence of a crime. Veronica's exit was the most dramatic. She hurled the pot with the orchid onto the hall floor, where it shattered with a resounding crash, and slammed the door. Her face contorted in a mask of hatred. When the hall finally emptied, leaving only them, Ma, George, and a few curious servants, Baron Anthony still held Eliza's hand. "You're trembling," he said, his voice soft. "I think I'm dreaming," she replied, with a faint voice. "Then it's a good dream," he said. "The beginning of a good dream for us both." That night, the manor house of Harmony Estate breathed new air. It was not the artificial perfume of deceitful flowers, but the subtle and true fragrance of honesty. And the Baron, who had long lived in the solitude of his memories, felt something rarer and more precious than love at first sight reborn in his chest, faith in the goodness of a human soul. The transition from her simple life on her father's homestead to the opulence of the manor house was, for Eliza, like being transported to another world. In the first few weeks, she walked through the long corridors of polished floorboards with the feeling that, at any moment, someone would wake her from that improbable dream. Everything was grand and overwhelming. The dark, heavy furniture, the tapestries depicting hunting scenes, the portraits of the Baron's ancestors who watched her from the walls with stern eyes. The household staff treated her with a frigid formality. They moved around her in silence, carrying out her orders with efficiency, but without the human warmth she was accustomed to. The most imposing figure was the governess, Mrs. Margaret, a lady with an impeccable bun and an austere gaze, who had served the Albright family for over 30 years. She had been very fond of the late Baroness Isabella, and made no effort to hide her disapproval of the Baron's choice. To Margaret, Eliza was an outsider, a country girl who did not belong in that universe. "Does Madame require anything?" Margaret would ask, with a politeness that sounded more like a critique. The word Madame left her lips with a tone of irony, as if she refused to use the title of Baroness. Eliza felt like an impostor. The silk clothes the Baron had ordered for her seemed like a costume. During dinners, she fumbled with the multitude of cutlery and glasses, feeling the eyes of the servants on her, judging her every move. The longing for her father's simple food, the smell of wet earth, and the freedom of walking barefoot in the pasture squeezed her heart. Anthony, however, was the personification of patience and kindness. He seemed to understand her discomfort and did his best to put her at ease. He spent hours showing her every corner of the estate, not just the house, but the coffee plantations, the storage sheds, the mill. He told her the stories of his family, not with arrogant pride, but with the melancholy of someone carrying the weight of a legacy. "This house has been silent for too long, Eliza," he said, one afternoon as they walked on the veranda. "Your presence has brought a new sound to it. Don't worry about the rules or what others think. Just be yourself. It was for yourself that I chose you." His words were a comfort, but Eliza's insecurity was deep. She needed to find her own space in that world, a place where she could feel useful and true, and she found it in the back of the manor house. Hidden behind a magnolia alley, there was a small garden surrounded by a low stone wall. It was abandoned, overgrown with weeds and dry leaves. The rose bushes were unpruned, and the flower beds empty. Anthony told her that this was Isabella's secret garden, her refuge. After her death, he hadn't had the heart to allow anyone else to touch it, and the place had withered with time. It was her favorite place on the entire estate, he said, with a tone of sadness. In that forgotten garden, Eliza saw an opportunity. The next day, to the astonishment of Mrs. Margaret and the other servants, she asked for a pair of gloves, pruning shears, and a rake. She changed her silk dress for a simpler cotton one, and spent the entire morning working under the sun. She pulled out the weeds with her own hands, carefully pruned the rose bushes, and cleared the flower beds. Mrs. Margaret watched her from the kitchen window, arms crossed and an expression of disdain. A baroness with her hands in the soil. Whoever heard of such a thing? She muttered to one of the cooks. But Eliza didn't care. There, with her hands dirty with soil, feeling the smell of the wild greenery and the warmth of the sun, she felt at home. The garden became her project, her sanctuary. She wasn't trying to replace Isabella or erase her memory. On the contrary, she felt that by caring for the garden the former Baroness had loved so much, she was honoring her spirit. Anthony watched her from afar, without interfering. He saw her dedication, the way she treated each plant with genuine affection. He saw how, little by little, the abandoned garden began to come back to life under her care. And he realized that this was a metaphor for what she was doing with the house and with his heart. Like the plants, he too was being cared for, and something he thought was dead and dry within him began timidly to sprout again. The public humiliation was too hard a blow for Veronica Burton. Instead of accepting defeat, she transformed it into a poison that she began to spread throughout the region. Consumed by resentment, she and her family initiated a defamatory campaign against Eliza. The story they told was quite different from what had happened in the Baron's Hall. "That girl is a witch," Veronica's mother would say during her visits to the other ladies of local society. "It must be. She cast a spell on the poor Baron so that he, such a distinguished man, would choose a pauper like her." Veronica went further. "They say her father dabbles in strange prayers. She used magic to make her part appear empty and bewitch the Baron. She's a swindler, only interested in money and the title. She would whisper into the ears of anyone who would listen." The seeds of malice, unlike the Baron's seed, germinated quickly. The high society of Hyde Park, which already viewed the ascent of a poor young woman with suspicion, eagerly embraced the rumors. It was easier to believe a story of witchcraft and self-interest than one of a virtue they themselves did not possess. Eliza soon felt the effects of the poison. When she went to Sunday service, people would distance themselves, casting sideways glances and whispering behind her back. At the village market, the merchants who once treated her with sympathy were now cold and distant. The loneliness she already felt within the walls of the manor house now pursued her outside as well. The title of Baroness, instead of bringing her respect, had marked her with the stigma of distrust. Anthony, realizing what was happening, became furious. His instinct was to protect Eliza, using his power and influence to silence the slanderers. He forbade the Burtons from entering his lands and made a point of treating coldly anyone who showed disdain for his wife. "I will not tolerate disrespect for my wife," he thundered, in a sharper conversation with a neighboring estate owner. But his overzealous protection ended up creating another problem. Eliza, instead of feeling safe, began to feel like a bird in a gilded cage. The Baron's actions, though well-intentioned, diminished her, as if she were incapable of defending herself. "I don't want you to fight with people because of me, Anthony," she said one night. "That only makes them think I'm weak and that I need you to protect me. It only makes things worse." The discussion caused the first tension between the couple. Anthony didn't understand. He only wanted to care for her. Eliza, in turn, felt she needed to prove her worth on her own merits, not by the strength of the surname she now carried. She decided, then, to face the situation in her own way. Instead of hiding, she began to do the opposite. She started frequenting the village more regularly, always with a serene smile on her face, ignoring the sideways glances. She knew that words would do no good. She needed actions. The opportunity arose when a heavy summer rain caused a flood in the creek that cut through the region, leaving some families of tenant farmers who lived in the lower part of the village homeless. While the Burton family and others of the local elite merely lamented the tragedy from their verandas, Eliza acted. Without saying anything to Anthony, she organized the estate servants to collect blankets, clothes, and food. She filled her wagon and personally went to the affected area. There, she found the families huddled in the small village chapel. Veronica and her friends were outside, distributing some stale bread and making sure to be seen, practicing charity. Eliza entered the chapel without a fuss. She talked to the mothers, calmed the children, distributed the food and blankets. She saw a small boy trembling with cold and with a cut on his foot. Without hesitation, she knelt on the dirty floor, cleaned the wound with a cloth she carried, and bandaged it with a piece of her own petticoat. The scene did not go unnoticed. The simple people, the laborers, the tenant farmers, saw in that attitude not the calculated gesture of a baroness, but the genuine compassion of a human being. Mrs. Margaret, the governess, who had accompanied her grudgingly by the baron's order, observed everything in silence. For the first time, she saw in Eliza not the country girl who had usurped her former mistress's place, but a woman of admirable strength and kindness. As Eliza prepared to leave, the father of the boy she had helped approached. "Thank you, madame. May God bless you," he said, his eyes teary. "We hear a lot of things around here, ... but what matters is what we see. And what I saw today was a good heart." That day, Eliza did not silence the gossip of the elite, but she planted something far more important, the respect and affection of the people. And Mrs. Margaret, upon returning to the manor house, looked at her young mistress with a new gaze, a gaze that, for the first time, contained a spark of admiration. The months that followed that decisive day were like a prolonged spring season at Harmony Estate. The transformation was not abrupt, but a slow, organic and profound blossoming that could be felt in the air, in the light that entered through the windows, and in the mood of the people who lived there. The epicenter of all this change was, undoubtedly, Isabella's old garden. Under Eliza's daily care, the place was reborn in a way that even the oldest servants couldn't remember seeing. It wasn't a faithful restoration of the past, but an entirely new creation that blended the memory of what was with the vitality of the present. Eliza didn't try to plant the rare orchids or imported tulips that the former baroness appreciated. With an instinct that came from the earth, she filled the flower beds with the flowers of her own story, white and yellow daisies that seemed to smile at the sun, velvety red carnations, manica bushes that painted the surroundings with their shades of purple and white, and glory bushes that burst with color, announcing the passage of time. They were simple, hardy flowers that didn't require excessive care, just sun, water, and affection. They were, in essence, a reflection of herself. The rose bushes, which had previously hung dry and sad, were pruned with a firm hand and now climbed vigorously up the wooden trellises, laden with buds that promised to perfume the air throughout the season. This new life in the garden seemed to infiltrate the entire manor house. The rigidity that once dominated the corridors gradually dissolved. Mrs. Margaret, the governess, showed the most remarkable change. The admiration she felt for Eliza on the day of the flood solidified into genuine, protective affection. One morning, she found Eliza in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, trying to teach the cooks her mother's cornbread recipe. The scene was so domestic, so devoid of any noble affectation, that the governess felt a lump in her throat. "Mrs. Albright," Margaret said, her voice surprisingly soft, "the late Madame Isabella would have liked to see life in this kitchen again. She liked the smell of baking cake. She said it was the smell of home." It was the first time she had mentioned her former mistress without a tone of painful comparison. Eliza smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "I think every home likes that, Mrs. Margaret. It's a smell that embraces you, isn't it?" From that day on, an improbable friendship was born between the two. Margaret became Eliza's greatest ally, guiding her through the intricacies of household administration, but also learning from her to see beauty in simplicity. The other servants followed suit. The Baroness was not a distant mistress who gave orders. She was someone who asked about their families, who helped mend a garment, who brought a home remedy for a child's cough. She had earned respect not by her title, but by her humanity. News of Veronica Burden's resounding failure and malice spread as quickly as the gossip she herself had created. But the result was the opposite of what she expected. Eliza's actions during the flood, coupled with the truth about the seed test, turned the tables. High society, always eager for a new target, began to ostracize the Burden family. The merchant, Veronica's father, saw his business dwindle as many estate owners. Whether out of loyalty or fear of displeasing Baron Anthony, had stopped buying from his general store. Veronica, who dreamed of being the queen of local society, became a reclusive figure, embittered by her own arrogance. One day Mr. George came for a visit. He arrived in his simple wagon, wearing his best Sunday clothes. Eliza ran to greet him at the entrance, hugging him with a longing that was almost painful. She took him for a walk through her garden, and the old man's eyes filled with tears of pride. "You brought your soul to this place, my daughter," he said, touching the petal of a daisy. "You didn't let the place change you. You changed the place." He looked at the manor house, imposing in the background. "You know, that seed the Baron gave you. It wasn't sterile, no. It just wasn't meant to sprout in the soil. Its fruit was different." Anthony, who was approaching, heard the last sentence and smiled. He greeted his father-in-law with profound respect, which went beyond formalities. The two men, from such different worlds, had developed a mutual understanding, based on the admiration they both felt for Eliza on that golden late afternoon. After Mr. George had left, Anthony found Eliza where he most liked to see her, amidst her flowers. She stood with her back to him, humming an old melody while pruning a dry branch. The light of the setting sun created a halo around her hair, and for an instant she seemed like a dream figure, the personification of the peace he had so long sought. He approached silently, just to have the pleasure of observing her for another moment, feeling a wave of love so overwhelming that it almost took his breath away. It wasn't the feverish passion of youth, but something much deeper, more solid, built on the rock of admiration and respect. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice a little hoarse with emotion. Eliza turned, and the smile she offered him illuminated the rest of the fading day. "They smell sweeter at this hour. It's as if they're giving thanks for the day. It's I who should thank you," Anthony said, taking the last steps that separated them. He took her hand, which held the pruning shears. He felt the small calluses on her palm, the texture of someone who works, and found it the most precious hand in the world. "I wasn't just talking about the flowers, Eliza. I was talking about everything. What you've done with this garden, with this house, with my life." He led her to a small stone bench under a sycamore tree. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the sound of the day's last birds. "When I proposed that challenge," he began, his gaze lost on the horizon, "I was a broken man. Pain had made me cynical, distrustful. I created that test to prove to myself that purity, honesty, were things that no longer existed, that had died with Isabella. It was a cruel game, and I only expected to unmask greed." He turned to her, his blue-gray eyes shining with moving intensity. But you, ... You destroyed my bitterness with the simplest and most courageous gesture I have ever seen. You brought me an empty pot, and with it, you restored my capacity for faith in people. You filled my soul with hope. He brought her hand to his face and caressed her cheek. I chose you for your virtue, Eliza. But it was in the months that followed that I fell deeply in love with the woman you are. I love the way you laugh, a pure laugh that comes from within. I love seeing your hands dirty with soil. I love the way you calm children and how you even won over Margaret's hardened heart. You didn't just become the Baroness of this estate. You became its soul. I love you, Eliza. I love you in a way I didn't even know was possible. The tears that streamed down Eliza's face were not of surprise, but of a profound emotion, of feeling finally seen and understood in her totality. I love you too, Anthony, she whispered, her voice choked. At first I was so afraid of you, of this house, of not being enough. But you never asked me to be someone else. You gave me the most precious gift anyone can give, the freedom to be myself. And it was for that man, the man who saw value in a pot of soil, that I fell in love. That night, by their mutual decision, the empty clay pot was removed from the corner table and placed in a place of honor on the large stone fireplace in the main hall. It was not a trophy of victory, but an altar to the truth that united them. It was a daily reminder that the foundation of their family lay not in wealth or title, but in the courage to be honest when it would have been easier to lie. Every night, as they sat before the fire, they looked at the pot, and it told them the story of how sometimes it is in the soil of what seems to be a failure that the truest love finds its place to bloom. Harmony Estate, finally, was much more than a name. It was a home. So, did you enjoy following Eliza and the Baron's journey? Stories like this remind us that truth and courage, in the end, always blossom. If you were moved by our story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new narratives. Leave your like so this message of hope can reach more hearts, and of course, comment below what you enjoyed the most. Your participation is the fertilizer that makes our garden of stories grow stronger and stronger. A big hug, and see you next time.